Hi, and welcome to Total Rewind, a Filmmaker's Compass podcast where we take a look at movies from the 80s and before and see if they still hold up and should be viewed in, 2021. I'm D-Man Dustin, joined by Christian CP. How's it going over there?
I'm great, man. How are you?
You look wholly prepared for this episode.
Well, I mean, dude, I love Indiana Jones. I think I wore my Indiana Jones costume for like 5 years in a row during high school. So I figured what better excuse than to put it on again.
Well, and the fun part is that I imagine you would still be dressed like this if we were a audio only podcast, but now we're doing video.
I mean, I dress like this on just like random Tuesdays, so it's not a big deal for me.
Yeah, for anybody that is only listening via audio, the movie for today's Total Rewind is Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's Indiana Jones, Steven Spielberg, and CP is sitting prepared for this podcast with the Indiana Jones hat and the overshirt on
already.
Right,
Dr.
You're good
Jones.
To go.
Boom.
I don't know if you have a whip, but if you did, I wouldn't blame you.
I don't have one. I wish I did, though, because that'd be awesome.
All right. Well, I'm excited because so far it seems like Total Rewind has been a hit. Last week's episode, The Karate Kid, was doing really well. We got a lot of great comments from our listeners. So we do want to say up front, thank you guys all so much for tuning in and hopefully enjoying the show. And now let's go ahead and dive into our episode this week, which is Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I'm going to throw it over to you, CP. Where do you think Raiders sits culturally in 2021? Is it still relevant?
Oh my gosh. Yes. How can you not say that it is? First of all, I mean, with the exception of Bogart, does anyone wear the fedora as good as Indiana Jones? No.
They don't. And I think one of the things that stands out is we actually live tweeted as we watched Raiders of the Lost Ark. So if you're ever interested in following along, we'll post to our social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, when we're going to do a live tweet session for a movie we're watching. And one of the things we both noted in our live tweets was the silhouette of Indiana Jones when he steps through the door, and then again when he's against the sunset backdrop. Yep. And both times he's wearing the fedora, and it's an iconic image.
Oh, absolutely. And on top of it, I mean, I don't know what the perception of archaeology was in the early 1980s when the movie came out, but obviously, the Indiana Jones character and idea of what archaeology could be kind of, I think, did what Jurassic Park did for paleontology.
Yeah.
It just, everyone suddenly understood what it was. It made it cool. And I mean, look at how many other movies and parodies and skits have drawn from Indiana Jones.
Well, and culturally speaking, Indiana Jones is still around in a certain context, which is right. They are still producing movies, if I'm not mistaken.
Number
a little
5's
nod of the
coming out, yeah.
Yeah, a little tip of the cap to Harrison Ford, who unfortunately was, I believe, injured on the set. So speedy recovery because we're waiting for more Indiana Jones. But there's also I think there's a Disneyland ride that is still really popular, and it may even be getting an update after the whole pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I think people have clamored for, never got again, was the Young Indiana Jones series. Everybody has always kind of wanted that after Indiana Jones 3. And that's something that has been rumored just throughout the years of, coming to light. And we haven't really seen it.
Yeah.
But, it's funny because that silhouette of Indy and the hat, I mean, after all these years, because when did Raiders come out? Like 82?
81.
What's funny is it's still recognizable. Almost anybody's going to be like Indiana Jones if you see that. And I don't know. I guess as far as cultural relevance goes, I would say Indiana Jones is as far like its influence on kind of that action adventure genre. He's a classic take on the character that goes on the adventure. And I think a lot of people, filmmakers in particular, still draw inspiration from Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Well, to take it to the next level, right? Like Lucas and Spielberg created a guy who's very memorable, who else carries around a bullwhip?
Yeah.
I can't name anyone, but I guarantee you, anytime you see a whip in a store or, whatever, someone picks it up and it's an Indiana Jones reference instantly.
Yeah, right. I mean, I literally have been shopping and I've seen the fedora and I put it on. I'm like, do I look like Indy?
Right. Like, that's just it,
So it's interesting too, because, they've talked about recasting, almost like rebooting, which if they do that, Indiana Jones might move to our other segment, movie remake time. But they've talked about recasting the character. And even, I think with the Shia LaBeouf character in the fourth one, they kind of wanted to have a successor.
Yeah.
And it didn't work out. Indiana Jones 4 didn't work out for a number of reasons. But that's a different
podcast.
Different podcast episode. But it's funny because they've been unable to recast the character. And I only bring that up because they did try it in Star Wars with Solo, where they recast Han Solo, another iconic Harrison Ford character, and to middling success, I think. I don't know that actor wholly captured what Harrison Ford did with Han Solo. And I think they're worried that the same thing could happen here because Harrison Ford is so iconic in the role.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm interested to see what they're going to do with Indy 5. I want to see if Spielberg goes back to his, kind of bag of tricks, I think he calls it, traditional stun effects and all that type stuff. So we'll see what happens with that. But as far as Raiders goes, let's go ahead and talk about effects. So what are your thoughts? Stunts,
oh my gosh.
Score?
Watching the movie, it still blows me away. I think that it's one of those movies that as a filmmaker you look at and you're like, that is movie making. The things that Spielberg does, I'm still blown away by the practicality of the entire car chase sequence where Indy's
right,
hanging from the truck and fighting people off of it. And now, and in fact, in Indy 4, when they kind of give homage to it, it's very CG heavy, and it just doesn't have the same effect as when you're like, no, they're actually dragging guys behind trucks and things. Like, it's quite a feat of cinema. And on top of that, Harrison Ford captures the character, and he brings that grittiness to real life that. Yeah. Lucas in the writing and Spielberg in the directing, make play out, and it's believable. And you're like, I don't know that I could survive in this pit of asps, but Indiana Jones could, and I know he could.
Well, and that's another thing I wanted to note was I also really appreciated upon reviewing, and I'm taking notes and stuff and live tweeting. Something that really stood out was the use of animals. I mean, there's real spiders, real snakes,
real monkeys.
There's a monkey. Like there's actually a lot of animals in the movie, and if I'm not mistaken, in story, some of them all died. I think probably some spiders died, some snakes died. I mean, I think Indy threw a snake off. No, he didn't throw it off the plane. That was his buddy's snake, right?
Yeah. That was the buddy's snake.
But it was interesting because there's a large use. There's camels. There was a lot of animals, and it was just interesting because I was like, wow, today a lot of that stuff you would just CGI it, especially the snakes
or spiders on leading Hollywood actors like.
And there's something about knowing that those spiders are real that you can't help but think to yourself, like even as the stunt guy, and I think Alfred Molina did that himself.
Mm-hmm.
But if I was like a stunt guy and they're like, listen, we're going to pay you a lot of money, but we're going to put all these spiders on you. I'm like, would I do it? I don't know.
Or the scene in the crypt, right? Like, I can't think of how, like, do you know a lot of actors who would have the guts to be like, yeah, like just throw a bunch of snakes around me. Let's do it. Yeah, like that's just a tribute to, how cool Harrison Ford is as a movie actor.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. And it still looks really good. Obviously, there is a little bit of the wide shots. You can definitely tell there's some rubber snakes in there. They're not all moving and slithering. And I think you might get that effect if you did it in CGI. But the problem is everyone would know that it wasn't real. Yeah. So what really makes that come alive is that the snakes that are on screen that do move are real. And you're like, wow, like, you know, even if a fourth of the snakes that are technically we're seeing on the screen, you're like, I don't know if I would want to be in any room with that many snakes, even if I knew they weren't poisonous and all that. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think another thing that is just really amazing when you watch the film is the kind of scale of the sets, right?
Oh yeah, they look.
And
great.
I mean, it's one thing that they're, you know, actually in location in the desert and the jungle and stuff, but these sets that they build, you know, when he goes into the first temple with the classic boulder scene, or when he goes into the crypt, or even when they, you know, they go to the island to actually finally open the ark at the end. I'm always kind of impressed that I'm like, wow, that's like amazing set design and such careful attention to detail. And in some ways, those are the things that I think, again, in modern cinema would kind of get swept to the side, and they say, oh, just, you know, we can CG it and enhance it and make it look more grandiose, where you're like, no, they actually had to go and build that. And I think that's so amazing.
Well, okay, now that you bring up the ending, of course we have to talk about that. When they open the ark, I mean, what's your thoughts on the effects there? I mean, they do look dated.
Well, they look dated for the 80s, but still, I mean, and actually one of my favorite featurettes is actually after the DVD when they talk about how they made the melting face. And
oh yeah,
like obviously at the time, like, you know, revolutionary, and they talk about it, how like to this day, so many practical effects people look at this, you know, at actually the techniques used in that and replicate them. And I think it holds up pretty well. One of the effects guys in that commentary talks about how, you know, in this day and age, you could do the practical effects and really enhance it with the help of CGI. But for the most part, it's not as dated, I think, as you feel like it should be when you think about how old the movie is, you know, going on 40 years.
It's almost like that scene where, do you remember they're like digging in the desert and there's like lightning?
Yeah.
Those effects to me seem dated. The actual melting of the face, though, I thought worked. It's almost so over the top and jarring that you can't help but, I don't care if no one has seen Indiana Jones, which seems like crazy in 2021. But if you haven't seen Indiana Jones and you get to that scene and the face melts off, I guarantee you anyone would be like, whoa, what the heck? You know?
Oh, well, and it's weird because the face melting, which actually holds up much better than the head shrinking.
Yeah. For sure.
And I think that that's probably just the fact that they did a really good job when they made it happen, you know?
Yeah. And then I wanted to I felt like Indy. I wanted to yell at Marion. He's like, keep your eyes closed. And she keeps like opening them. I'm like, God, just stop. Just close your eyes and like, hope you don't die. But no, it was, you know, as far as just going through the whole movie, I really did enjoy, you know, like you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, the practical effects were great. The stunts, it was a lot of fun. But before we move on to, you know, kind of looking at the story, I did want to ask you, John Williams' score, does it hold up?
I mean, I don't like getting in this conversation just because I don't think you can actually pick up best of John Williams scores, but you can definitely make the argument that this is among them.
Oh, definitely.
So iconic, holds up. You know, as I said, I throw on the hat and I start singing it, and I'll probably be singing it for the next week and a half just because it's Indiana Jones. We all know it and we love it.
Yeah, it was iconic. I mean, obviously he's at his best here. Usually he is when he's partnering with Spielberg and Lucas. Yep. But, you know, the score works throughout, but obviously the iconic theme stands out as another one that over the, you know, test of time since this movie came out, you still play Indiana Jones and everyone knows. Everyone knows. Like you could have never seen Indiana Jones and you're like, oh, that's Indiana Jones. That's a theme.
Absolutely.
And so to me, that's just a testament to how great it truly is. You know, Star Wars is that way, where most people probably hear Star Wars and they're like, I mean, you know what it is. It's hard not to.
Absolutely.
You know, the Imperial March, this and that. You're like, I mean, I've never seen Star Wars, which I can't believe I just actually said that. But, you know, I know that music.
Well, and I think the other thing too is it captures the spirit of not just who the character is, but what the film is, right? And this is not, and it's such a beautiful genre in the sense that it's truly an adventure film, right?
Yeah.
It's got elements of action, it's got elements of um, you know, fantasy, it's got elements of humor. I mean, Spielberg has amazing job of just making you laugh in the middle of this film. But what it comes down to is at the end is it's just fun. And
Yeah.
the score at its heart captures that.
For sure. Definitely. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I mean, I know me personally, like if I'm ever going on any adventures, I get in my car, I might fire that up.
I've probably been with you when you did.
Yeah, like, hey, we're gonna go do something. Let's throw on Indiana Jones. Let's get the adventure vibe going strong. So, okay. Final little segment I want to talk to you about is the story itself. So, as you just kind of mentioned, it's this adventure story. But Indiana Jones himself as a character kind of moves through it in a little bit more plotting way. I don't know that, this is a character study movie, right?
Yeah.
Like he doesn't change a whole lot.
He's very static. Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of like the static hand through the movie. So I kind of want to get your impression of like, what do you think? Does the story hold up? Is it still as adventurous as it was when it released in theaters?
I think that it is. And I think part of the reason why the story does hold up is that, when it was released in theaters, it was taking place in the past.
Okay.
It was involving Nazis.
That makes sense.
And, so
it doesn't date it.
Because, I've never, I wasn't alive in the late 30s and 40s. So for me, it looks like I'm looking at a piece of history, and it's so well confined within the realms of that world that I think that kind of preserves it better than if, maybe if you were to compare it to like a James Bond film.
Yeah. Or like, could you picture Indiana Jones like using an iPhone?
Yeah. Right. Like it just doesn't work, but setting him at that place and time and that character works in that world.
Yeah. And I think the motivations of the characters, it is enough to push the story forward. But, a lot of our notions about Indiana Jones now kind of come from the third one, where we learned that, he's kind of been doing these, quests since he was younger. His father, he kind of follows in his father's footsteps. When you actually watch the original Raiders of the Lost Ark, you don't see a lot of that. You just know that he's motivated, like, all right, I guess I'm going to go get it.
Well, and it helps that, right? I mean, Hitler is the villain in the film. And of course we have to get the most powerful object in history before Hitler does. So like the motivation for the character is very strong, and we understand why he's so committed to against these impossible odds and these ridiculously careless feats he takes at times to try and get it. We understand it.
But I mean, it really is just like a quest movie.
Yep.
Get the thing.
Yep.
And, they do, they get it, but, it's kind of weird because it does get opened anyway, which they were trying to avoid.
Yeah.
And it just ends up going poorly for the Nazis instead of empowering them.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, it's always great to see Nazis, die.
And have their faces melt and stuff.
Yeah, that was pretty sweet. So, I mean, maybe that's a little, just kind of like wish fulfillment. But, it did kind of beg the question, like, Hitler was looking for this ark because he felt it, had untold power and would, help him in his quest of world domination. And it ends up that if you open it, it's just a shit show. So, it's kind of weird at the end. I was kind of like, well, obviously, as for the sake of the ark, like, just put it somewhere no one can get it, because it'll just wreak havoc wherever it is. I don't know if that meant like Hitler was going to take the ark and like plant it somewhere, like, at like, the White House, he gets the ark in there and then just opens it up and everybody's, his enemies are gone. I don't know what he was going to do with it, but I mean, it didn't seem like it was going to give anyone like power per se.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, I guess the irony behind the quest is like, you don't know what power it has. That's kind of the mysteriousness of it, is it's like, it has some sort of power, but we don't really know what it is. You got to open it to find out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think the other great thing is to, what makes this quest so much more powerful than most other adventure movies is the fact that, right, like the Ark was historically relevant, right? It had its
Yeah.
place in history, and of all the lost great things, it is probably the epitome and the embodiment of that, like that, the ultimate MacGuffin, right?
Yeah.
And so, Lucas was obviously very aware of that when he wrote it, and setting it, this incredibly mysterious, badass character going after the most legendary of all legendary things, and then just, for good seasoning, making the worst villains in human history be the bad guys that he's up against. Like, I think that's just a formula for success.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because like I guess, did Hitler ever actually look for the Ark? Is that like,
I had a history teacher in college, this may be true or not, I don't know. He said that they actually were looking for some of those objects.
okay, yeah, like I guess from a historical context, when you consider the fact that maybe they actually were looking for it, makes it even a little bit more fascinating, because it almost is like, could that quest pick up again today? Like, could someone go find the Ark of the Covenant?
Yeah.
So I don't know. And then lastly, before we move on from the story and kind of give our verdicts here, I wanted to talk a little bit just about some of the iconic scenes that pop up. There's the shot contest, there's the drinking contest, there's the scene where Indy, pulls out the gun and shoots the guy with the swords. And then, of course, the ending of the movie where the Ark is put in a box in this giant warehouse and then just disappears. I thought all three of those were still excellent scenes.
I would agree. They hold up really well. I mean, I love the one where he just shoots the guy. I think that's actually brilliant. And I know I tweeted about this. I would have loved to have seen what it originally entailed, this elaborate whip fight scene that they had kind of originally.
Yeah, because didn't Harrison Ford, like, he was like hurt or hungry or something? He's like, can I just shoot him? Yeah, can I just shoot him? And they were like, yeah, that's actually better. And it's funny because that scene's been parodied, either parodied or, there's been homages or nods to it in other movies where people do similar things.
Well, and it makes sense, right? And there is that scene earlier where we actually see him. They take the time to focus on the fact that he's packing his revolver. Which I don't know which came first, the revolver shot or the fight sequence, but it's a good connection to that.
Yeah, and I don't know, the end scene was really good. They pull back. Obviously, that's been done before. That's parodied. Like, I remember there's a scene in The Office where, like, one of the character, the HR representative, he has all these complaints, and then he goes down to the warehouse and puts the complaint box into an empty hole, and they pan back, and it's all these boxes.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen that done many times where people are playing with that.
And I think at the time too, like, what a brilliant ending when you're like, this guy just did the impossible to get this amazing artifact, and kind of like, in the epitome of like kind of, bureaucracy. It just goes into a warehouse and gets lost and forgotten for all time.
Well, and it also does a good job. Obviously this is an adventure film, but it makes you think too, like, how many other adventures are there?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. There's so many
boxes that you're like, there's so much potential for either other objects or, what else is in this warehouse?
Absolutely. And, obviously another totally iconic scene from the film is the boulder chase at the beginning. In many ways, considering how minimal it is, as it's only a couple minutes, just to kind of set the tone of who the character is. The boulder
itself is only a couple seconds.
Yeah, it's parodied everywhere. I mean, the Indiana Jones ride has the boulder, There's so many other things like the Crash Bandicoot games and things that play off this getting chased by a giant boulder. In some ways, I think that's almost as a giant boulder chasing you is now synonymous with Indiana Jones.
Yeah. And then I guess finally, like, I get this infectious feeling that everyone involved had so much fun making it.
It seems that way when you look at the interviews with Harrison Ford and Spielberg and Lucas and, the rest of the effects guys and the stunt guys. It seems that way. And it just seems like one of those movies that you're like, how could you not? I mean,
Yeah, like if you like filmmaking, if you like making movies, it just feels like this was one that it's like, man, it must have been so cool to be on that set. So,
Yeah. And it just,
and there's so many legends at work. John Williams doing the score, Spielberg's directing, George Lucas is writing, Harrison Ford is the action star. I mean, it's literally amazing. You're like, everything's there, practical effects, special effects, everything. It's just so much fun.
absolutely. You know, as a filmmaker, you cannot help but love this movie because it's everything we love about film wrapped up in one thing.
So I think we know what the answer is, but let's go ahead and say it anyway. Is Indiana Jones or just Raiders of the Lost Ark still required viewing in 2021?
Yes, it totally
Absolutely.
holds up. As a filmmaker, as a film fan, as just like a human being in general, you should see this movie. And I think the bigger question is this for our audience. Have you ever met anyone who does not like Indiana Jones? That's really what I want to know.
I think now every time I meet someone, I'm going to have to ask them. Well, let's just start our relationship here. Do you like Indiana Jones or no?
I mean,
yes,
like, you know,
thank God. So I don't imagine I'd get a lot of them. So anyway, yeah, I agree. And, you know, there's not a lot really you can look at this movie and kind of knock about it. You know, it's not necessarily the most quotable movie, but that doesn't really do anything to its detriment. It's still great.
No, and there are some incredibly iconic lines, you know, snakes, why they have to be snakes, or I'm making this up as I'm going along, or, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that there aren't some, it's just, you know, nothing that's so iconic. But otherwise, I mean, I can't think of anything to really knock the film. It's just fun. The music's great. The acting's good. Everything is awesome. So, yeah, I think if you haven't seen Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, add it to your list. It's on Paramount Plus. You can rent it online. Or if you're like CP over there, you can get the DVD. Yeah,
in fact,
on Amazon.
You should probably just buy the DVD because it's worth it.
Yeah, so we'll be sure to you know, probably get to all three eventually, right?
Oh, I mean, of course we have to.
Yeah, I think we'll end up watching all three, so that'll be in the future. But to everybody tuning in, just wanted to say thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. Hope you enjoyed the show. Obviously, Raiders, if you've seen it, watch it again. If you haven't, go check it out. And be sure to continue the conversations and leave us some feedback on social media at Film Comp Podcast. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and then, of course, we have a YouTube channel. And you can subscribe to the podcast at Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and, of course, on all the social media channels. The episode will be posted. If you guys want to help us out, you can give us a share or a comment and leave us your feedback, help us with the engagement metrics. And then, obviously, like I said, we're live tweeting as we watch some of these movies. So you can follow me at Big Kid D-Man and Christian at NDCal5. So Christian, final thoughts, final words?
Final thoughts. Great movie. If you haven't watched it when we watched it, watch it again. And if you did watch it again. And other than that, just stay tuned next week because on the next episode of Total Rewind, we will be checking out another Spielberg classic, Jaws.
Ooh, the first blockbuster. So
just
I'm pretty
in time
excited
for the 4th of July holiday.
Yep, and that is always a marathon film every 4th of July. So I'm super pumped.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll be back next week.
Thanks, everybody.